choose to love where freedom flies from my heart, where the light keeps shining. And I choose to feel the whole world crying for the strength that we can rise above. I choose love.
Hey Larry, how are you doing? Hello everyone. Welcome to this week's conversation. It's actually the second conversation we are having in the series of the 10 great words.
Yeah.
And you know what I'd like to do, Larry, is maybe spend just a couple of minutes to recap some of the thoughts I had about last week's session, and then lead us into this week's. You know, I was reading a text on Jewish philosophy that said that we carry a note in our pocket, one in our right pocket that says, I'm unique in all the universe. And then in the other pocket, we carry a note that says, I am nothing but dust. So what this Jewish philosophy says is that leaders and people know that they can use either or of those statements at any given moment because they're both true. It just depends on the moment. So to me, this really means either we listen or we assess a situation either with our head by thinking logically and task-oriented, result-oriented, or we think with our heart, which is, you know, connecting more to relationships. So it's both relating to words, W-O-R-D-S, which is really the theme that we're talking about, right? That we started last week. The words that we use to express our emotions. That's how we humans communicate with each other, right? So last week, we were relating to the book, The Covenant in Love, where you, Larry, you received and you put out in print the 10 great words. And last week we started to examine those 10 great words. And we came to a conclusion last week, which said, number one, we asked ourselves, is God a loving God with a capital L? Because the smaller L is like the human type of love that we practice. It's different from God's love, right? Number two, is God a providing God? Versus, do we need to prove to God through our actions and, you know, that we can create provision, or is God providing for us? And number three, is God a teaching and benevolent God, as opposed to a commanding God that's judging what we do, right? I guess that kind of tells us what we talked about last week. That leads us into this week. And you know, Larry, I am an advocate of clarity. I'm a student, I get confused, I read a lot, and you know, I learn as we go along. And I want to start with asking you to maybe weigh in what I just said, you know, that dynamic of, you know, am I accountable as an ego in this life to produce, you know, and live my life and be accountable to the words that I say and that I think, versus just let go and let God, you know, that influence of God in our life. I think that's really, to me, that's the dynamics that we're talking about. And what do you think? How can we talk about this and bring it to the next step? So how can we live better in using our words in a way that it helps us?
I want to back up to what you're saying about the words we speak and the thoughts we form and the considerations of our minds. And then, like you said, thinking of the heart. Even that supposes that somehow the heart pump has something to do with it, because people lose sight of the heart being the spirit nature of who you are, not the physical pump of the heart pumping in my chest, but the heart center of your being, literally being the spirit form of your being, not your soul, not your body. And one of the things that I would say is we have this challenge in life where the steps we take are already known by the presence of God. The measure of our walk is already unfolding as God already sees it in its completed form. However, if we align ourselves with the nature of God, we move in such a way that we are in ease and alignment with the nature of how the divine manifests. If we are against it spiritually, we are antagonistic to ourselves, or we're diminishing ourselves or putting ourselves down in comment, or like we were talking about last week when it came to that commandment of thou shalt not kill. But if you really looked at it, the totality of it, if you find yourself upon my path, you will discover these attributes within you, and that you will find that you can do no thing that will alter life as it is intended to be. And then you will find that even your words could bring death to another. You could speak diminishing, tearing down, diminishing somebody to a lesser state, which is what brings us to this week. But the key is when you're talking about the difference between power of manifest, speak, words, power, do this, and or just surrender. And there's a difference between surrendering to give up and surrendering into the nature of that which is the divine, because the divine is unfolding. The blessed result of creation has already been seen and completed within the divine. We are, no matter what happens, we are approaching that end. We each hold a role within that outcome and the progress to that outcome. If we are in contention with the divine nature, or as we were discussing within the 10 great words, as you find yourself upon my path, you will discover these attributes within you. If we are fighting against the attributes of God, we will fight against the manifestation and always feel like the universe is against us. However, if we submit in trust to God through absolute surrender, we will find that we're not surrendering to give up, but by surrender, we will be moved in such a way that our feet will move in this direction, and all of a sudden we are guided to shift and go in this direction because we're in alignment with the divine. And the heart center, spiritual being, YahShua said, live not of the flesh, meaning the soul, set aside desires of the body, live as the spirit, so that the fullness of God's glory would be known through you. So if we are to set aside the things of a spiritual nature that do not align with God's holy attributes and embrace the attributes of God living as the spirit, our bodies will come into alignment with the nature of what divinity is forming as the completed result. It doesn't have to be a battle, but we as humans tend to feign toward the distress, the chaos, the different situations based upon how we were brought up.
Or we just forget.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's really what it is. I wonder sometimes when you forget, you may have good intentions. You say, I want to be aligned with God. I want to be aligned with that surrender because I know that it will be, a blessing for me, but then I forget. Like the word we want to talk about today is adultery, right? Thou shalt not commit adultery.
Yeah.
In that scenario, you may be a good husband or you may be a good wife. And you look at that command and you went astray.
Yep.
And then you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So maybe we can examine what does this really mean, adultery. Before you get into this, Larry, though, I looked at, as I said, I'm always checking logically what it means. What does adultery mean, right? So I looked it up in the Merriam-Webster definition, and it says voluntary sexual intercourse between a married person and someone other than that person's current spouse or partner. Then I was digging a little bit deeper, and I saw that, the word adultery, or the root of the word comes from the Latin, which is adulterare, which means to pollute or defile.
Or another definition was to bring something of a lesser form to something of a greater form. That was the original Greek translation.
All right. So it has to do with purity, right? Or not being pure, being unpure, or in whatever you do. So the and I want to bring this up on the screen if this is a good time, Larry. I have it right here.
Well, I do want to speak to one part that you just mentioned.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're describing thou shalt not commit adultery, one of the challenges that I've seen with that command is there's so many people that are not married or are single or in a relationship or partnership outside of the marriage union. And the minute they heard, thou shalt not commit adultery, well, it doesn't apply to me. And they set it aside. But they don't understand that the original word given in the 10 great words, and I'll just read this real quickly. In me, you will not adulter or diminish the purity of love in any form of life. You will find you cannot adulter any relationship or diminish anything I have established by introducing anything of a lesser form into it. You will know the greater power of my love and no longer be controlled or limited in love defined within humanity. You will hold spiritual sight and the awareness to surrender all things of a lesser form as spiritual offerings through love as they evidence life and my presence. You will see all things freed from any lesser form to be realized in that which it is intended to be, blessed and most beautiful in my sight. So the reality is this great word, just as in number 6 that we talked about last week, this can apply to every single relational encounter. It's not just limited to those friends of ours that we know are married. It's not just limited to the experience of those people that we know that have stood before the altar and made a covenant before one another. The adultering or the diminishing of one form or another to bring something of a lesser form to something of a greater form. So that can apply in the nature of, I use an example, I believe there's an example in the book that speaks to if somebody prepared for hours to get you a gourmet meal, and they did all the prep of the vegetables and all the different things they were doing. They made these beautiful sauces and they did this incredible effort, produced an amazing meal, came forth with the first course. It was delicious. And then they come out with this magnificent, beautiful, beautiful presentation of a meal, the main course. And you reach down into a side bag and pick up your McDonald's French fries and dump them on the plate. You have just adulterated the offering because you've diminished the value of their effort. You've diminished the quality of the food upon the plate, and you have adulterated the gift that was extended by the person that sees himself as chef and functioning within hospitality. So when it comes to the nature, this does not diminish what goes on within a marital union. Because if they find themselves upon God's path, they would find that they cannot bring anything of a lesser form. And if a husband found himself tempted by another in the form of spiritual lust, physically being lusted after another person, he would come before his bride and say, honey, I need your help. I'm encountering something of a spiritual nature within me. I'm feeling a sense of spiritual lust. I am losing sight of fidelity. I am through fidelity joined with you, and I'm feeling spiritual infidelity within me. Can we pray together and relinquish it? You come together, and the two of you now shift from a place of bringing something of a lesser form to that of a greater form, and you take that which is the greater form, the marital union, and you increase upon it by gifting life to the spiritual influences that were governing the actions of the bride or the groom. And this is the importance of understanding that this is not limited to just that marital couple. This can be in people that are seeking a relationship with one another. This could be in a work relationship. How have you diminished or put down the relationship with your boss? Have you found ways to diminish your employees? You found a way to govern them through anger, govern them through hostility, govern them through fear, you are now adultering the boss-employee relationship.
The challenge here I see is, what if one of the parties is not willing to embrace the path of God, or the path of, amendment, mending the situation? What do you do then?
Well, there is a provision that, I've shared this before in other videos, that we are in a situation each time in our lives where we take different covenants, like the book, A Covenant in Love. We covenant before the presence of God. So we form a covenant within a corporate entity that we work for, or we form a covenant within a marital union. And that covenant is something that bonds the flesh, meaning God says, I join you as one flesh within matrimony. That means one soul. So you have two spirits, two souls, two bodies, joined as two souls into one soul. So you now have two spirits, one soul, two bodies. In the covenant of that experience, in that opportunity to become one within that covenant, you have two people that are in agreement within that covenant. However, life happens. One of the persons falls out of agreement, and they move off, and they start functioning in a spiritual nature that this individual does not agree with. And they're seeing that this person is forming a sense of arrogance or control, or trying to empower it, or they're trying to divide, separate, create division. The key here is the persons joined as one flesh have the power to speak first person for the other. So if the husband is showing that he is walking through infidelity, the bride has opportunity to sit down and write a prayer for her groom and speak first person the blessed nature of her groom, not what he may be evidencing. So she could speak, God, thank you, Yahweh, that you blessed my tongue to speak first person for the sake of your son. I, your son, David, receive the holy gift of fidelity, integrity, truth, clarity, and I draw directly to your spirit for all counsel and revelation and release from all things of a spiritual nature. So now what the bride has done is she's shifted to become one of the flesh, and she's speaking first person into his body. So the words that she's speaking, even if she's in the bathroom and he's gone off to work, she's sitting there reading in front of a mirror. And I've seen this happen with marital couples that I've worked with, where they were facing divorce within a week, and they sat down, and the gentleman wrote the image of his perfect bride, and the bride wrote the image of her perfect groom, thinking they were going to swap them. And I said, no, you can't swap them. You, husband, will speak first person for your bride as you're doing all your chores throughout the day. You, bride, will speak first person for your groom throughout all your chores of that day. And you will elevate one another through speaking these words from one another outside of each other's earshot. So there won't be any defensiveness rising within the heart. There will only be receptiveness within the body. The body will be transformed by the words of the soul. And that can bring things back into proper order. But there's a caveat with that. The reality is, if you are speaking words of blessing for your partner, your spouse, and they begin to evidence that they are rejecting them because they don't know you're doing it, you have opportunity to sit with them in full declaration and say, open up with them and share. I'm concerned. I'm seeing a number of things going on. You're moving to be more distant. Is there any way we can gain some counsel on this? Can we seek one another to find what's going on in your heart? Why you're withdrawing? Why you're pulling away? With zero defensiveness. Do not adulter it by taking any form of offense for what your partner might say. Because your partner might say, well, I've been having an affair with somebody. Your role is to look at that and say, okay, help me understand. Not, now I have reason to beat her. Now I have reason to push her down. Now I have reason to diminish her with words. I have reason to look at this and understand what's the spiritual motivation, so I can now not adulter, but I can bring something of a greater form to that which is of a lesser form. You're on mute, I think. And now you're...
There we go. Even
okay.
as you just said, even as the opposing partner, you know, you should not adulter the situation. That's what you're saying. I think that's
Exactly.
an eye-opener for me,
Yeah.
because I can still influence that situation by adultering it, but I don't want to do
Exactly.
that. I want to be open.
Well, what if somebody comes at you with a self-defensive comment and all of a sudden you get offended? In a spirit of offense, you respond in offensiveness. You will begin to encompass the spiritual process, and that spiritual process is not only in your flesh, meaning your soul, but it's rising from within your bride, and you don't even know it, because you have engaged it. The marital union is not just a physical swapping of, you know, fluids from our bodies and physical embraces and verbal communication. There is a spiritual union unfolding beyond your sight. So if you embrace offense and the partner is coming forward without offense, that offense will rise from within them as well. And that's what we call adultery. You're diminishing the nature of this union. And again, it's not just limited to the marital union. It can be with your friends. It can be with your corporate entities that you function with and work with. It can be in church settings. This person was offended as they were trying to vote for a certain outcome within the church. We need to understand the nature of how the offense stirred and what's motivating it, not be offended by the fact that they're offended.
Interesting. You know, I read about from Mark Talbot, who's a philosopher. He made a statement once, and I'm going to read it in just a minute. But he looked at that we are, you know, in an ideal case, we are mystic warriors, right? We want to be warriors that can solve problems, that can find a way around the words that we usually use, but
Yep.
you know, in tune of God's will and blessings. He made this statement once, which I found was interesting. It kind of fits into this discussion. He said, "There is a hole in our boat," and I'm thinking now of the marriage, right? Couple traveling. "There's a hole in our boat. It is midnight, but the stars are out, and it's a beautiful night. Bail." That's where it ends.
Okay.
So I think what this means to me is, you know, we may be discussing situations where we want to be spiritual about finding a solution, but yet we need to be grounded. If there's a hole, if you're sinking, if we're about to die in that boat, we need to bail the water out of that boat, or we're going to sink. So maybe there's some other actions that we need to do.
Well, right there, what you're talking about, what's happened in humanity is whenever there is something wrong in a relationship, something out of balance, something that offended somebody or whatever, they're looking at it like, look what you did wrong to me, instead of thank you that you reveal this so that we can bring healing to it and move forward. People are immediately entering into this process feeling justified in righteousness. And most people don't understand, especially those of our friends in Christian body, they don't understand that righteousness is demonic. And what? Because if a person claims righteousness, they have become demonic in the fact that they are diminishing themselves before the presence of God. There is one thing that is righteous: God's presence. God, YahShua, Abun. That is the one thing that is righteous through all creation. So if I claim righteousness in my relationship, I have just set divide between myself and my partner. And if I turn around and look at her and start to blame her for the nature of her actions, instead of looking at her saying, you know, honey, something's stirring here, something's going on, something moved you in a way that you felt you had to act in this way. I need to understand what's going on in your heart. And as the conversation unfolds, yes, there's going to be hurt, but you can pray and release that. Yes, there's going to be offense. You can pray and release that. And it's going to lead you to a point of discovery in the conversation, and you do the Dr. Hugh Len thing. And God, thank you for revealing this. Forgive me that I have allowed this to exist within my union.
So thank you, God. We know, we can see the hole in the boat. It's there. Let's fix it together.
First, let's
So
bail
we
the
don't
water
sink,
out.
right? Right? No.
Let's get the spiritual things out of the way.
Exactly.
As we're bailing it out, let's bail it out. And then now that we're together, we're side by side looking at the leak, still bailing. And one of us will gain the wisdom, oh, I see how we can plug the leak.
Yeah.
But until the two of us are in agreement, because one's offended, the other one's hurt, the other one's angry, this one's ticked off, that one's become a warrior instead of a minister in love. When that occurs, people end up in a place where they assume that process of warrior, therefore they must fight for the ground that they hold. And I would ask people, do you engage with your partners out of humility to honor them? Or do you engage with your partner to possess and control them? That would be adultering the relationship. But if you can do it in such a way that you are there to honor as you approach them through humility, it doesn't matter what spiritual ground you encounter. The two of you in a clear and open dialogue in the fullness of love, knowing that you're there to discover healing, not hold the other person accountable, changes the whole dynamic to be one of blessing, increase upon increase, and the blessing increases, and there is no adultery.
Perfect. I mean, I can't add anything to that. That's perfect. That sums it up, I think, for today.
Yes.
And I just want to let all our listeners know that we welcome your comments. We welcome your participation. Please let us know what you think and what your thoughts are so we can continue that conversation, because we could obviously go on for another hour, right, Larry? It doesn't stop. But
well, we're not going to get this done in one more episode. We're going to have to.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. So go to gracehealing.org, go to our YouTube channel and explore the many videos that we have. And we will be back next week with another one of the great 10 words and go dig in and find out more of the truths that are out there.
And if you have any further questions about the 10 great words, go to the website. Andreas did a phenomenal job embedding the book into the website. It's yours for free. It also comes with the opening meditations. You click on the meditations to do them, and those are very important. The order and structure of the book is very important, the way it unfolded and the way it came through me. Because again, I didn't write this over a course of years. This came through in a 7-day period. And I was led to structure it in a certain way. And there are people that are being healed just touching it. There are people that are being healed and reading it. So be blessed in it. Access the tools that you have available for you. And we love you, and we are here to receive your prayers and reach for need at any time you wish to reach out.
Great. Goodbye, everyone. Good to see you, Larry. We'll talk next week.
Yes.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.